presentation is lunch. And the panel discussion, which is the next program thing, is going to be at 1:15. So after this lecture, we're going to have lunch. There's a lunch break. It's about an hour later. 1:15 is the panel discussion. Everything's in this room.
It's working. I'll just look for the cover.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, never mind. I use. So should I take it off? Okay. 1 second. This one. Okay, it's not working. Fine. I'm not sure I'm detached yet. Oh, I took up the wrong one. Hold on.
כן, הכל ביוטיוב כאילו, אפשר גם...
ככה זה בסדר?
שים טיפה יותר גבוה? אוקיי.
בסדר? Thank you. And it's all ready? I mean, it's ready to go? Amazing. Okay, thank you. All right. Good morning. All right. Oh. Can I have one of my source sheets? I don't know what they are. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, we're good. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation. I've heard already there's a very good energy, good vibe in the room, so thank you for inviting me to participate. And we're going to start off with a clip. I'm going to just give a little instruction, and then after that, we'll talk about what we're going to do. So we will discuss where we're headed, but I want to just first start off with a little quick activity. In this video clip, there are students passing basketball to each other. Please keep track how many times does the white team pass the ball to each other. It's like a minute, something long. How many passes do the white-shirted individuals make? Someone want to repeat back the instructions? What are we looking out for?
How many times the ball is being passed?
By the white team to each other. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. It's a minute, 21 seconds. Oh. Okay. How many passes did you count? 1 second. How many passes? Yes. 13. Anyone else get 13? Anyone get a different number? You got 14? 15? 12. Okay. Raise your hand if you saw anything else interesting in the video. Yes. Anyone not see a gorilla? Let's watch it again. How many people didn't see it? 1, 2, 3. Okay, a bunch. Oh, that's not what we want. Okay, once again, you can watch it again. You can recount if you want, just for fun. Okay. What What do we make of that? What do we make of that? Impressions, thoughts? What do we do with that? Please.
I was so focused on your instruction, and I had to concentrate hard on what you had asked us to do that I didn't see anything else. I couldn't watch the students in the black shirts. I couldn't help.
Definitely. Anyone else want to add anything? What do you make of it? Yeah, please.
I also was very focused, but I got the wrong amount.
Okay.
I don't understand.
The truth is,
the gorilla, but
I don't remember what the right amount is. Could be you got the right amount. I was just, I had my own agenda here. Oh, we did say. Okay, fine. Okay, great. Okay. Conceptually, what do we do with what just happened? How do we understand it? How do we make sense of it? We just saw a video where people were passing a ball and half the class noticed a gorilla in it and half didn't, given the instructions that were given. Yeah.
Also, so you see what you want to see, and everybody wants to see something different a lot of times.
Good. Any other thoughts, impressions about this? Okay. It's not working. All right. Okay. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say that when you think there's only one thing you're looking for,
Yeah.
you're not even open to finding something else.
Yes. Meaning there's this concept of selective attention. We notice certain things, we don't notice other things. What determines that? What guides that? What is it that we see and don't see? And how does that impact our classrooms? How does that impact relationships with students? And by the way, everything we're going to talk about today, we're talking in the context of classrooms and students. It applies to life, to all relationships, to all interactions. So this is almost like the mini lab of a much broader concept that applies everywhere, but we'll talk about it in the context of classrooms. And our goal for today, what we're going to be talking about today, is improving our connection with students and our relationship with students through this prism of kind of what's going on in our own minds, in our own expectations, and our own assumptions, and how that guides what goes on and what gets created in the classroom, both one-on-one as well as in the environment as a whole. So here's our outline. We're going to be talking about these few points. Assuming the best, teacher expectations, accessing compassion for our students, and then shifting into a piece in Tanakh relating to Moshe and his leadership and how that relates to some of this. So that's our general, what we're going to be accomplishing today. We'll talk about each of these things separately. So when we talk about, one second, please. When we talk about assuming the best, I remember someone once saying, there is this gray that exists in the world in terms of other people's intentions, and everyone has to make a choice about what you're going to assume in that gray space. Whether you assume positive intentions, negative intentions, and the choice that you make, either often not consciously, but potentially consciously, the choice that you make will end up really framing how those interactions go and how those relationships are built based on those assumptions that you carry with you. We create that narrative. And then so too in the classroom, I believe that the classroom is almost this like dynamic being that gets created. There's the teacher, there's the students, and all that. Each person exists in a vacuum. But when you put it all together in a room, there ends up being a certain energy that's created together. And here's kind of where I'm coming from in the whole approach for today. I've observed many students, and I've been in many classrooms, and I've been teaching teachers for a while, and kind of in my sleep, I can break down lots of important, teaching strategies and criteria and important elements for good lessons and engaging students and active learning and how to meet different students' needs, and I can do that very comfortably. But I was very bothered by the fact that I would go into different teachers' rooms, and there's just something different in some people's classrooms, whether, separate from these important, I'm not belittling these things, I believe in them a lot. But apart from these specific pedagogy pieces, there are certain rooms where it just feels like there is a positive vibe. Students feel comfortable, they feel valued, they feel seen. There's something they want to, other than the fact that students are happy to not be in class, but if you put that aside, they want to be there. They feel good there. And there's a certain energy and a certain safety in the room that creates a certain environment. And it would bother me to try to kind of wrap my head around, what is that? What's going on there? What's that secret sauce? Granted, kind of spoiler alert, there's obviously not going to be one recipe, and different people come with different strengths, and use their strengths and play to their strengths. So I'm not going to pretend there is one specific answer for, for how this happens. At the same time, I do believe that when we kind of try to break that down a little bit, there may be really important pieces that we can isolate and identify that can help kind of understand and therefore become more conscious and deliberate about creating a certain environment and creating certain relationships with students and ultimately leading, hopefully, to a certain growth on the part of the students throughout the year. So that's kind of where this is all coming from. Now, so going back to that concept of like there's the individuals, but then there's this like new bria, this new creation called the dynamic, and that can go in many different directions. And partially when we talk about how our assumptions create a certain vibe, and we're going to be talking a little bit concretely about that, we end up really creating a certain narrative in the classroom. Meaning, is this a classroom of people who all they want is shortcuts and they don't want to do any work and they're lazy and they're not motivated and they just, kids have no value these days? Or is it a classroom of winners? Is it a classroom of all-stars? And I remember at one point there were two educators working in the same place that had very different views of students. And one of the educators he would just back them up and get their back and speak positively. And the administrator said to him, I don't know, like, what's and he was very, very successful with them. He said, I don't know what's cause and what's effect. Meaning, is that you really got through to them, they were great, and that's why you have this great impression of them? Or was there something about being able to kind of see the good in them, connect with that, believe in that, and grow that, which allowed them to thrive? So in that sense, we're creating the narrative of what we see. When we kind of assume the best and look for the best, what we see is what we grow. But B, that ends up not just being a reflection of reality, but it ends up kind of creating the reality and determining that reality. It's kind of giving them a sense of, I believe in you. I know my assumption is you're going to do great. My assumption is you mean well. Yes, there are bumps along the road. We'll work it out together. But it builds a certain trust and a certain partnership. And here are a few concrete strategies that this specific part comes from Teach Like a Champion. Doug Lemov describes this in the latest edition of his book. So some examples are, when students are not complying. So what do I see? Do I see students who are just refusing, or maybe I really wasn't clear enough with the instructions? Let me go over it again to clarify, what the expectation was. And in truth, there really are times when we actually weren't clear enough. So looking for the good intention behind the mistake. There's a class discussion that's getting totally out of hand, and is the reaction, we can no longer have class discussions because no one's willing to follow the rules. Or, I love that everyone's so enthusiastic about it. I appreciate the enthusiasm. With that, we need to kind of channel that energy and have a certain order in order for things to function. Narrating the positive, talking about out loud the good things that you see, because when you say it out loud, that reinforces it. That becomes the reality when you're describing, I see this student working really hard, despite not initially understanding the instructions, or on a class level, I see that even though you didn't at first understand, you really kept going, you stuck with it, and I see the results now that you're getting. I see students, following instructions, again, individuals, class, but you look for it and it grows it. And that determines the environment and the reality. The classroom environment becomes one where students feel a partnership with you, have buy-in, and are motivated to invest. The last example that he gave was talking aspirations. I saw in my son's class, talking like how much we're accomplishing together. In my son's first grade class, when the teacher had them do a little bit of partner work during Chumash, he said, we're doing chavrusa learning, like, how those guys in the yeshiva do it when they're much older and they're sitting, that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to do yeshiva, yeshiva learning like the very much, the older big guys. That's what we're doing here today, and kind of pumping them up and helping them kind of view themselves as experts, as engaged, as at a high level. The science teacher who says we're going to become mini scientists today. It creates a certain energy and it lifts them up. So I want to just now kind of play with this a little bit. I'll take a step back before I explain what we're going to do. just this past, I've been thinking about this over the past few months, and I worked on a unit in Azrieli where I teach. I teach online for graduate students at Yeshiva University, and what I did was I had a whole module on some of these things, and then I had them create a log. When I was thinking about how to do it here, you don't have like the place to practice it the same way, because I actually had them over the course of a week select a student that it can be challenging for you. And play with all kinds of things that we're going to be discussing today. But I want to share, most of these were taken from a student that submitted this. Okay. I would like to share, taking one step back, before I share that. Can you just think of maybe examples on your own that may have come up, real, made up, whatever, where you say something and you don't realize that in the way you phrase it, it's suggesting negative intent. Meaning without even realizing it, the phraseology kind of points to, the example is like, if my husband didn't do something like, why isn't this important enough for you to do it? He may not have been able to get to it, but in the way I phrased it, I'm assuming it's not important enough to you, and we do that with our students, with our friends, with our close family members. Any thoughts or suggestions about examples that could potentially kind of illustrate this concept?
Like in the classroom or in life?
Either way.
Okay.
Either way.
You can always think about that kid who's like, yeah, he's just trying to get away with stuff. And
Totally.
that's classic.
He tries to get away with everything. Yeah. Well, and how might this express itself when you talk to him?
Well, I'm already, like he's going to try to outsmart me on something and have my guard up.
We're going to get to, you're pointing to an additional direction that we're totally going to get to, relating to our expectations. But the way we phrase things.
I would say, this time everyone listen carefully.
Suggesting that you weren't in the past. Yeah. What might other examples be? Things we say to our students that could easily come up.
Why did you, blah, blah, blah.
Why did you, right? Meaning assuming it's not that you just had trouble doing it, it's that you chose not to. Yes. Other examples.
Starting a sentence with, I'll bet you can't find that word. Anything that has negative wording.
Although it's interesting, because I think that same phrase, if it's said as like a challenge in a kind of friendly way, that has a very different connotation than an actual, I really don't think you can. But yes. Any other examples? Could be from life, it doesn't be classroom.
Sometimes it's just a tone. Sometimes it's not even words.
True. 100%. I want to share with you some examples from a student's log over the course of the week where she would almost say certain things, and what she flipped it through trying to be conscious of how she was phrasing things. Okay. So, why do you refuse to listen? What might that be changed to? I'll share with you what she did, but there's obviously many no one right answer. What could that be flipped to? Yeah.
How can you show me that you'll remain on task?
Okay.
Show me ways that you can remain on task.
Great. So she switched it to, I see you're having a hard time following the instructions, meaning as opposed to refusing to listen, I see this is just, posing being hard for you. Play practice is an unacceptable justification for slacking off with homework. It is unacceptable. Homework comes first. How can you kind of not that it's such negative intent there, but how can you kind of up it a little bit?
I know you're really busy, but you have to make sure that in addition to...
Could I help you time manage while you're in the school play?
So I know you're really dedicated to your drama club and work so hard at play practice. Kind of goes back to what we had said. That goes back to looking for the good intention behind the mistake. It's awesome that you're involved in this, and that's great. We also, we need to make sure that, the homework gets done. You think I believe that you'll make up all the work by the end of the weekend?
It's a very ambitious plan you have. I'm not sure if it's realistic. Maybe we can come up with something.
Yeah, great. I'm concerned that trying to finish all that work in such a small amount of time will be overwhelming for you. It's the exact same content, but the direction and the partnership and the assumptions are so different. The class was playing a game together, meaning as part of the class. Why have you not put away the game I asked you to put away 5 minutes ago? What might be a sub that is just more inviting and is less kind of confrontational or patronizing?
What would it look like if this game was put away right now?
Here's what she wrote. I'm so happy you're enjoying the activity we did in class. And obviously, the kind of like side note with all this is it has to be genuine, meaning, yes, we are making a conscious decision, so there's an active decision, but if it's fake, like they sniff it out right away. But if we can realize, like the student really was enjoying the activity going on, like that is true, but it's now time to put it away so we can move on to the next assignment. It almost turns a criticism into a form of celebration, a genuine one, meaning not a fake one, but I'm so happy that you were so engaged and participated. We need to move on to the next assignment. Okay, the child yelled out, and the teacher wanted to say, don't yell out the answers.
I love your enthusiasm.
Great. I'm happy with the answer, but we need to remember our class rules to raise our hands. Everyone has an opportunity to answer. They were about to play a game to review the spelling words. The kid said, I already know all of them. So the teacher on the tip of her tongue was, I highly doubt that you already know 100% of them. What might be a sub?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Reviewing multiple times in different ways is really important and helpful. I love that you've studied and know the words already. So this time, play it for the fun aspect and not just for the review. Like again, it just takes the edge off of this, conveying like I really do believe that you're like out to break the rules, versus I'm assuming the best. I'm assuming you have good intentions. I'm assuming you want to do the best you can, and I'm here to help you with that and to facilitate that. And the words that we choose, slight differences, really creates an entirely different tone in the class, an entirely different narrative in the class, and students perceive themselves differently, and they think you perceive them differently and rise up to that. Okay, so that was just one piece in terms of being conscious of the way that we phrase things. Related, what's your name? Nachliel. So you had referenced, until now we really spoke about kind of what you say. You referenced really what you almost expect and what you assume is what you expect to happen and how that ends up playing out. Now, we are all familiar with the concept of self-fulfilling prophecy. I found it fascinating that there was a really robust research study done on that to say, like, let's really understand, is this really a thing? They looked at, it was done in Germany, they measured a whole bunch of things and put it together to see how it predicted the outcome. So they looked at the teacher expectations in reading and in math. They also assessed where are you, meaning what is your, assess their fluency, assess their phonetic awareness. They assessed where students were at in reading and math. Then they checked, meaning how do those two things align? Were the teachers accurate or inaccurate in what they expected? Because that allows you to kind of track things. And then they also looked at a whole slew of their general cognitive abilities, their motivation. They looked at gender. They even looked at like parent education level. They looked at a whole bunch of things in order to control for those factors to make sure those weren't influencing the outcome. Then they looked to the end of the year, and they wanted to see how did students do in reading and math, and how did teacher expectations relate to how students did by the end of the year. Here's what they found. They found teacher expectations were decently inaccurate. Meaning, in some cases they were accurate. It wasn't never, but there was a nice, healthy amount of inaccuracies in terms of either too high or too low. And obviously, the most interesting thing is that the inaccuracies significantly predicted their end of the year achievement. Meaning, the inaccurately high expectations led to greater achievements. In math and reading, inaccurately low expectations, thinking that they can do less than they really can, was predictive of end of the year lower achievements. Interestingly, in math, not in reading, which may make sense because math is much more objective and concrete. Reading has a lot of interpretation on the, reading comprehension and understanding leaves more, I think, is a little bit more vague. And sure, you can tell us if that's true. Yeah. But just to clarify, they're not saying when the predictions were accurate, this is what happened. Only looking at the ones that were inaccurate, the inaccurately high expectations led to higher rates of growth that was more than predicted. Inaccurately low expectations led to a trajectory where if you started off on the 30th percentile, you ended up not at the 30th percentile, but at the 12th percentile.
In other words, if you're projecting something negative, it'll be worse. If it's positive, it'll be better.
And yes, but even if it's inaccurate, meaning overly high actually helped them.
It's a general direction. Right?
Yes.
I'm thinking good, it'll be good.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to get a really quick story that I heard about this.
Please.
Actually, there was a teacher who had two students, same first name, same last name, different first name.
and he wrote report cards, and by accident, he sent the shining, wonderful, excellent report card to the poor student.
Okay.
And the parents did not understand why the student all of a sudden became more interested in doing the work and excelling. And it was because he got the wrong report card.
Wow.
And it showed how great he was, and he wanted to live up to that.
Amazing story. And I people I think maybe have heard a similar story about the IQ scores. Are you familiar with that story? No? Basically, there was a class that was extremely difficult. They went through teacher after teacher. They were very desperate. They found a sub who was willing to come in. The sub came in, and the principal decided, I'm not going to tell her just how difficult and low achieving these students are, because she's not going to want to be a teacher for us. I'm just going to not say anything. Thank God we have a body in the room to supervise them. And she, and let's just not kind of jeopardize that. She came in, and over time, the principal hadn't really heard much. He was expecting to hear that things were going disastrous and the class was a mess. And he hadn't really heard much. And after, over time, at some point he kind of inquired, how's it going? And then he said, oh, it's good. And then he saw they were their report cards, and he was really surprised by the fact they were doing far better than he had expected. And he went to meet with that teacher. And he said, I have to be honest, I'm really surprised. Teachers had such a hard time with this class. And the sub said, really? You gave me such a strong class. I'm so they're wonderful. I'm so surprised to hear that. And the principal was like, wow, we've gone through multiple substitutes who didn't know what to do with themselves. And the teacher said, I was so surprised at that first day when you gave me the list of students with their IQ scores 125, 132, 128. I was really taken aback by how bright they are, and I realized I'm going to have to really work with them and challenge them, because they're a really strong class. And the principal said, that's their locker numbers, not their IQ scores. But kind of the same idea of when that it's not just theory, it's actual, research documented these concepts, that the way we perceive them and the way that we relate to them, the way we, what we expect of them really does kind of grow them and lead them to that. So with that, one second, okay. What is it? Where does that bring us to? It kind of leads us to ask ourselves about what are these assumptions? And we carry a lot of lenses with us that we don't necessarily we're not necessarily aware of, we don't necessarily choose, and we end up seeing things through that lens and thinking about almost before, when the student raises their hand, before they even say anything, what's going through my head. And the student that raises his hand, and before even they speak, I'm thinking, okay, how off topic is this question going to be? I'm ready, bring it.
I never look at names of tests when I grade that.
That's so smart.
Because I don't, I'm fine with it, you don't intentionally do it, but if you know whose tests you're marking, sometimes you're like, oh, I know what they're really saying one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, great. The child comes to you crying, and you're thinking, who did you pick a fight with this time? Before they even say what happened, those thoughts are already kind of going through our minds. When I was trying to kind of do I guess kind of think about myself, I was thinking back to two different situations. One is that one of my kids had a certain stage where they just wanted, always bottomless pit-esque, always wanted more things, more whatever, and I remember the child would come to me, and I remember realizing this about myself. Between when they opened their mouth and the words came out, I was thinking, what do you want? And please don't take all my money, and please leave me with just a little bit, before, and they might have even just been saying oh, Ema, do you want a drink of water? But before, that is what went through my mind before the child even spoke. And there's no doubt that ends up, affecting subsequent interactions. A different child had a period of a lot of tantrums, and you almost, as you're saying something to the child, a very basic instruction or whatever, oh no, don't tantrum, we don't have patience for it right now, and there's a guest in the house, and I'm so tired, and I have to get to this meeting soon, and that stance is obviously, even if it wasn't even about to happen, so that stance is going to affect and direct what directions things go in, as opposed to kind of calm, assuming things will go well, seeing things well. Again, not in there's that space between, we're not trying to be delusional, because we need to be in touch with what's going on, but at the same time being aware of those assumptions and of those kind of veils or prisms through which we see the world affects things. I don't know if anyone just has any like examples that come to mind of situations where they may have encountered this with a certain student that before or whatever, certain student person that before the student or person even spoke or acted.
I had a whole conversation with him before I opened his mouth and then
Right. Yes.
That happens all the time.
Yes. Okay. Fine. So basically kind of going back to this study that our expectations really do determine the course of things, recognizing that those assumptions end up guiding, and it could be different mechanisms that dictate this. It could be that the feedback we give may be different. It could be we invest more in those that we expect more of. We hold them to higher standards. But either way, I am much more able to give them what they need and to help them grow when I'm kind of expected, when I'm not clouded by everything that I expect. I want to share a couple of points. I think that, this is some takeaways that I took from reading this study. It's the first thing I wrote about realism being a little overrated. So generally speaking, we very much value being like in touch with reality. We are not aspiring to be delusional people. And yet, I'm going to in some small way challenge that, where we almost want to the good that we see, we want to relate to as essential to who they are. And the challenges that they demonstrate relate to as kind of an external accessory that they're dealing with right now. And there is a small amount of suspending rationalism because we're choosing to relate to certain things as core them and to relate to other things as you happen to be working through that right now. But that very slight shift, as we saw in a very research-supported way, really affects outcomes. Whether it's academic outcomes, whether it's emotional and personal growth, it affects outcomes. So almost like making this decision that I will relate to the good parts of you as the essential you, and the true you, and who you want to be, and who you really truly are, and I relate to your less pretty sides as we're all on a journey, we're all working at it together, but that's not the true you. Yeah, please.
I'm wondering about, you mentioned that this isn't part of the core pedagogy that you teach, or that would be listed in the great list of great classes. I wonder why that is, and also, if you think this is something teachable, it really has to do with your personality and how you view your whole life. And being a positive, self-reflective person who's, oriented to being nice to kids versus teachers who just are a little more bitter and sarcastic. And then I wonder from a teacher training perspective, if you really could change someone's perspective.
Okay, so the answer that resonates with me, I'm going to borrow from a different context, where someone asked Ron Lichtenstein whether can teaching, is it just talent and either you have it or you don't, or is it something that really can be taught and improved? And the answer that I heard quoted was there's this range where at one end of the spectrum you'll have those who are just all-stars, they may have no training, they're just great at it. You have the other end of the spectrum where no matter what you do, it's just not going to be for them and it's not going to be successful. And then you have a whole large middle where with support and training and practice and reflection, you can really make progress. I relate to this the same way. I think there are some people who are just extremely positive people. Intuitively, they connect to the positive, and others, you almost feel do you ever see a rain cloud in the sky? We all know those people in our lives who are just very upbeat, positive people. There are those who carry around with them a thunderstorm, always. And then there's really everyone in the middle where I don't think any of us are changing our personalities. I do think becoming...
You showed how a teacher, because you drew attention, was able to change the way she was speaking.
Yes. So I guess, and I'll share some student reflections because I just found it powerful, but I do think with more awareness, more conscious thought, and conscious choices, there can be a lot of movement. So I wouldn't say it's teachable like a science, 1 + 1 = 2, look for the good and then everyone will be perfect. I don't think it works like that, but I do think, I'll be honest, I'm much more of a math science person. This stuff is all abstract, but at the same time, we see the research supports it, and there has to be ways to kind of figure out what are some of these ingredients and how can they be brought in this accessible, I don't want to say bite size, that sounds like it's being too trivialized, but small things that actually really do yield very significant differences. Does that kind of, please?
What do you think to escape the great lists I mean, those are based on people observing great teachers.
I'm sorry, what, the
I don't
teach
know,
like
all the
champion?
lists,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, you know, what's his name, Marzano or
Yeah.
Kim Marshall or whatever, you look at
Yeah.
all those lists.
Yeah.
So I believe they looked at all the research and great teachers and sort of qualified into measurable actions, right? So you think this escaped that, and why?
It's a good question. I mean, look, people talk about classroom environment. You'll find a million things online about building a positive environment and knowing your students. And I guess the slight, this is not a chiddush, I'm sure people speak about it, but the piece that I kind of wanted to focus on that brought me to this, I think when I initially titled this, I think I titled it as bringing out the best in our students through working on ourselves. Meaning I sort of wanted to get to the core of like what's going on in the teacher's own world and prism that's having, it's less about, do you do the get to know me chart and have every student write about their strengths and weaknesses and how can we, have little bins where you can write about good deeds that you saw. Those are all wonderful things and should happen. I'm a big fan of all of them. But this is kind of at the level, so first of all, I don't know if it escaped them. Maybe I'm just not aware of people doing more, I'm sure there are a lot of people that invested in it. I personally I didn't come across tons of getting into I don't know, I'm sure it's out there, but I don't know why it's not front and center. Maybe because it's very abstract, like you said. Shira?
I think a big piece, coming at least for myself, is learning to not see things as personal. A kid's misbehavior is not because, it's not about me. Even if they're angry or they're fighting you, it's not necessarily about you. And also in terms of this piece, I feel like it is true, though, that only one piece of their behavior it's coming from somewhere else and it doesn't define them. A lot of times, I'll speak to students individually, when they're not doing well in their behavior issues. So, I had a kid this year who I met with and he was like, I don't mean to be rude, he's like, Judaic studies means nothing to me. So, he just didn't connect. Yeah. And I said, I want you to be honest, and I was like, it makes me sad. I'm not angry. I'm it makes me sad. As someone who teaches this, I'm I love it, and obviously I want my students to feel this. Mm-hmm. And I'm my hope then is just that I give you what you need to connect. But there was something. He really just.
And we're totally going to talk about that in a couple of minutes because I think you're onto something extremely important. Please.
When I was at the department head, one of the things I tried to institute is establishing Lashon Hara rules for the staff room, because we're describing here as if a teacher works in isolation. But in actual fact, when a student comes into your classroom, they often think that the teacher that taught them last year has bad-mouthed them to you. So they react according to their presumption of your presumption of them.
Yes.
Now, the truth is, unfortunately, that often does happen, and that's why there really should be very, very clear rules about Lashon Hara in the classroom, in the staff room, about how we talk about our current students who will often become the future students of others. But there is this dynamic, therefore, between the perception of the teacher of the student and the student's perception of the teacher's perception of them. Now, on the flip side, when Ahmed Alian started teaching in seminaries, what was strange was there's almost no information given about my future students, meaning I'm told to just make sure you don't mention this word because some kind of crisis got into their life, but I don't know them academically. And as a classroom teacher, that was kind of weird because often in a high school, you know a little bit more about your students. But I took it as a gift and I said to my students, listen, I literally don't know anything about you. I don't know if you're a great student or a lousy student. You have a fresh start here.
Yes.
I think we need to be doing that more in elementary, middle, and high schools.
I hear that.
That students feel that they're really not being judged by their past.
Right. I think what you're saying is so on target, but it's bo'er bi to add one thing. What we're aiming for is that a student would have no havamina that this last year's teacher is speaking Lashon Hara about me.
Right.
We are aiming for not just that they're not going to be, that the teacher likes me, sees me, hears me, values me, understands me, appreciates me. So I think you're absolutely right. And that should be in place. And a parallel to that, one step behind that is classrooms where the students wouldn't, we partner together on the bumps on the journey, but we're in this together. The teacher likes me, and so that's kind of what we're aiming for, notwithstanding the truth of everything that you're saying. Please.
I just wanted to say kind of the flip side that I think it's safe to say that there are certain students that trigger you You know, every person is different, and you have certain things that bother you. And even if you don't know anything about the student, pretty soon they're going to start behaving in a certain way.
Yes.
And that might trigger you. So I'm here to say that there are ways that you can work on that.
Totally.
I have had so many visits with the school psychologist and the assistant principals and the principal and anyone I could think of to speak to help me get a positive attitude about a child that I have difficulty seeing in a positive way.
Yes.
And it's necessary to work on it.
Right.
And it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yes,
It's
absolutely. I think, so first of all, you're saying, you're talking about that level of like, what's going on in here that's determining my reaction, and relating to what Shira said, like, it's not personal, and how can we work through our own personal kind of things that pop up and get in the way of just seeing that student? Please.
I think Turetsky has a book called "That's Not a Fault, It's a Character Trait."
Interesting.
So if you can identify what it is about the kid that makes it present that way, but then take it and flip it and say, you know that every character trait has a positive and a negative.
Yes, and we are.
Yeah.
That is actually a perfect segue into what sorry, I'm going to add one more thing. I want to talk about that. I also think in terms of like for those who are just kind of obsessed with truth and like, it's not true because this is how they are. I think that who says that the person in front of me right now is like the totality? We're all on a journey. Is one person the same thing as they are 10 years later? So who says that him right now is more accurate and realistic than who he is in 10? We never take a little baby, a 4-month-old baby that's screaming his head off, and say, this is who he is. He is self-centered and only interested in his own needs and doesn't care about anyone. That is the essence of this person. We never say that. It's one data point. We know developmentally that makes no sense. So too, the kids in front of us, the child in front of us, who says that I need to, the most accurate perspective is the behavior being displayed right now. If we kind of zoom out a little bit and take into account that it's all a process, like who says the true him is him right here and now, as opposed to in 5, 10, whatever, down the line.
That's reminded me of a certain psychology that exists called internal family systems. And it's about the fact that we are not black and white. Nothing is black and white. We're gray. We're all composed of all the different parts of ourselves.
Yes.
So yes, that student is not one part. There are many different parts to all of us. And we have to really look at somebody and see, that this is what they are right now, but this is not the totality of them.
Yes,
And
it almost humbles us. Like, get off your high horse and assuming like now I get him, and wait a second, like there's more going on, and yes, great. Okay, so I want we had said we've spoken about assuming the best in terms of what assumptions we communicate through our words. Then we spoke about kind of our expectations. Forget about the way we say things, but just how we see things. And the research study that kind of showed how our own, before we even say a word, how our own perspectives end up being self-fulfilling prophecies. I now want to just briefly talk about what many of you have really alluded to and touched upon in terms of accessing compassion for our students. This obviously dovetails very well with Dan Lakaf's chus. I have found that different people relate to Dan Lakaf's chus in different ways. I guess I just first want to open it up, and if anyone has a particular kind of way of relating to this concept of being Dan Lakaf's chus, and then I'll share what's worked for me and helping me to access a certain compassion for students, for friends, for whatever that was not initially accessible to me. Anyone want to just kind of contribute? You can take a few seconds to think.
I teach high school here in Israel.
Okay.
But I was one myself. And a lot of times, kids are crazy. But then I think, like, if I was in their shoes, I would be doing exactly the same thing. So, like, I get it. Like, I really, really get it.
Like,
but I'm still holding standards. I'm like, well, I did the same thing, so I'm just going to let it off.
Yeah.
Like, okay, at least I get where they're coming from. So I'm not, like, really angry. I'm just more like, okay, I get it, but this is for your own good, what we're trying to do.
I hear that. Kind of get it, realizing where they're at, where they're coming from, and accessing that perspective. Great. Anyone else want to share? Please.
It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And so the teacher's gaze upon the student, the eye contact, the smile, can make all the difference in relaxing the student so that they don't stutter and stumble and feel humiliated if they can't get the answer out that instant.
So maybe part of Dalenkov's Chut is recognizing that they're responding to external stimuli that kind of direct them in a certain direction. You want to say something?
I sometimes prefer to use the phrases Ein Tova and Ein Ra'a because
Okay.
it forces us to actually choose Ein Tova. Dalenkov's Chut is often kind of a more fluid term, but also the actual phrase is missing two words, Et Kol, 3 words, Et Kol Ha'adam. If I'm not mistaken, it's the Sharim who says, if you look at the totality of a person, you can always be done Dalenkov's Chut. So done Et Kol Ha'adam Dalenkov's Chut forces us to say, unless I know who they entirely are, I'm not in a position to evaluate this small snap, of what I see in this classroom.
Great. So I think, you'll say that, one very commonly referenced idea is, Dalenkov's Chut, it looks one way. Maybe what you're seeing isn't really what's going on. You would think that person's screaming at the other person, but really they're just practicing for us, a skit. And you would think that person stole from the store, but really they prepaid. And, they have these books, actually a really cute book my kids have, Tachshov Tov, where it's a whole book of scenarios where it looks one way, and then you go to the back and it helps you understand what's really going on, and it's totally different than what it initially seemed like, and that's great. It's a very lovely approach. It happens to not really work for me, in the sense that we tend to rely on our faculty of sight and of thought and of logic. We tend to assume that the way we function in the world is by what I'm seeing, more or less a lot of the time, is what's going on. So yes, we can do these very cool mental gymnastics to kind of figure out what it could be that's different, and that's true and that's great. For me personally, that doesn't really work wonders. I'm sorry, I'm behind. Okay. It doesn't really work wonders in accessing that compassion, because the vast majority of the time, that very cute idea of what it is, it's not actually what's happening. It just isn't. So for me, that's hard kind of to allow me to access this compassion. So I will, yes, please.
Well-known machloket in Gemara Ketubah, right? Ketzad menakdim lifnei hakalam, Beit Hillel says, Kala Navis Chasudan, Beit Shammai says, Kala Kemot Shehi. I've always understood that as a reflection of a machloket you see elsewhere between those same groups, between, Emet and Shalom, as you said before. But just listening to you talk before, I thought, just listening as you were talking, I kept saying to myself, maybe it's possible to do both. In other words, Kala Kemot Shehi means you can't lie.
Yeah.
But if you look hard enough, you'll find what you can say about her, which is not Ava Chasuda. Maybe that's what you're.
Yes.
Maybe that's what you're trying to get.
I think so. Yes, meaning we really are trying to hold both at the same time, as you're describing. I want to share a perspective on Dalenkov's Chut that, for me, kind of transformed the way that I related to students, to anyone in my life that kind of upset me or hurt me or did something that really was hard for me. I guess if there's nothing else that you take out from this, maybe it might be something that could potentially speak to you in the way that it spoke to me. So we'll talk about two layers of it. Baseline layer is, what we often hear, yes, what I see happening is what's happening, but I don't know the backstory. We all know that we have days when we're not on our A game. We're stressed out by this. We're worried about that. We just had a hurtful encounter with someone, and therefore, yes, this is what happened, but I'm not at my best today. We all have days like that. And we can all recognize that even if what I see, we never know what people are carrying with them, what medical struggles are going on behind the scenes, if they're waiting to hear back from we don't know what they're carrying. We never know. Even when someone has the brightest smile on their face, we never know what's going on. And allowing that to kind of give context, there may be something else going on beyond what I see, and allowing that to access a certain compassion for that person, we can all relate to that. So that's level one. And that's very nice. I think the bigger chiddush is that if in fact there's actually nothing going on behind the scenes, there's no backstory, there's no context, that is so much worse. Because it means that whatever social blind spot this person has, leading them to behave that way, it's not limited just to this situation. They carry it with them always. And whatever price I pay in my discomfort in interacting with them, again, whether it's a student, a neighbor, whatever price I pay as a result of their way of operating, there is an excellent chance that the price they pay is infinitely higher. They may or may not know it, but what I mean by that is if there is someone who says hurtful things to others, maybe not even realizing it, and inserts, let's say, a certain toxicity to the relationship, I only have that when I interact with them. They can't escape themselves, and they carry it with them always. Or if there's a student that has a certain, is impulsive or has certain social, challenges. So yes, maybe something's going on, and if not, there's that much more compassion for that person. There's that much more compassion for what they have to deal with, because the price they pay, whether or not they are aware of it, is infinitely higher than the price I pay when I relate to that. None of us chose our struggles. None of us chose our vulnerabilities. Hashem gave each of us our own package. There's an excellent chance that if you ask this person, if they had the option to eliminate that blind spot or that limitation, of course they wouldn't want to have to carry with them a tendency towards rudeness, towards being self-centered, towards, saying things that kind of, they don't even realize are just like poking someone at their most sensitive spot. Hashem could have given me that vulnerability the same way. We didn't choose to have these faults, and therefore I access the compassion not because I'm reinterpreting what's going on and really what I see is happening isn't really what's happening. No, it is happening, and not because they're stressed out about this medical test or their parents going to get angry about whatever it is. Not because of that. This is who they are. And kind of connecting to that vulnerability of a challenge that they carry with them, it becomes not this choice to ruin our classroom, but a struggle that this child carries with them day to day in a way they pay a huge price for. For me, that allowed me to just we're all vulnerable. We don't choose our blind spots. We don't choose our weak spots. In the same way that we hope that others will be compassionate with us about these, whatever difficulty each of us carries, that for me is how to access kind of compassion for those students. The student who is so unlikable, what a rahmanas. What a rahmanas for them that they want to be good. No one wants to be bad. Everyone wants to connect somehow. Everyone wants security. Everyone wants to be liked and seen. And the students for whom it is so much harder to access that, not just with me, but with all their teachers, not just with their teachers, but in a good chance with their peers, with their families, suddenly it goes from this somewhat kind of ugly trait to like poor thing. What can I do? How can I be there for you? Because it's their blind spot, vulnerability, limitation, challenge that they have to carry around with them, and they wish they could eliminate it. They didn't choose it. They don't want it. Hashem could have given it to me instead of to them. We don't choose these things, and through that to kind of get this different perspective on those people, whether it's the students, the supervisors, the friends, whatever it is, that just are kind of thorns for us. I know there are a few hands up.
I think I saw this, I don't know. I just remember as a student, sometimes if I would get in trouble for something and I said I didn't do it, the first thing was, well, you obviously gave your teacher a reason that you were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to say on that Tanakh thing, there are times where they are really doing it, it's coming from somewhere, but don't we want to help them with that? I don't know, I've had kids that get very chutzpahdik around test time. It's their anxiety.
Right.
But instead of just finding the compassion for it, it's talking to them about it.
I want to clarify one thing.
When you get anxious,
yes,
this is your
response. This doesn't justify the behavior at all. This doesn't excuse it. This doesn't make it okay. Thank you for making sure I clarified that. The idea here is not and then it's okay. No, we need to help them. We need to work with them. But it's coming from a place, as opposed to coming from a place of, you drive me crazy, and every morning when I wake up, I think, I hope I don't have too many encounters with you. We're creating that internal space for compassion and for connection. And to see them as, just this, innocent neshamah that has just a lot of baggage to carry, as opposed to someone who is out to make my day bad. So, that's the starting point. Then we work with them, we help them grow and change and learn strategies and become aware and adapt, absolutely. But it's getting to that place, again, it's going back to that, what tone are we creating in our classroom? When we can access that compassion, our whole state of mind is different. The way we speak to them, our body language, our eye contact, it all becomes different when we can really access that place of compassion.
Your students also see how you react to it,
Totally.
Totally.
Totally. We are not condoning any of this at all. A term that I saw, us being a bright mirror for our students, meaning we're mirroring back them, but a brighter form of it, kind of their best selves. So in this case, we're kind of accessing there really is goodness. We're not making this up. There really is goodness in them, but for some students, it's just so much harder to find how to get there. And from there, nothing, this isn't justified. From there, we work on it. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Sure, important point. Other, I think there were other hands up or other thoughts, reactions. Okay, fine. So let's move on to, 1 second. We end at what time? 12:20? Is that? Oh, 12:15. Oh boy, okay. So we're gonna, we didn't get the Tanakh part, but we'll do that in a second. I want to share just a couple of reactions because I think that it was telling from these students keeping a log. One thing I learned from the keeping a log this week of a particular student is how our thoughts have such a powerful impact on how we interpret an event. Two people can see the same thing but interpret it entirely different. And skipping ahead, the positive things I noticed in a student I would have likely not noticed if I wasn't looking for them. Our students will see that we see the best in them and will put their trust in us. Main discovery was how vulnerable a student that annoys me really is and how much they are motivated by praise despite the fact that she doesn't really come across that way. Okay, I'll skim to the middle. However, this is problematic because oftentimes the teens who are intrusive, impulsive, rude, those are the ones who need the most help and guidance with working on these things. By framing these qualities as challenges for which they suffer the consequences the most, I can train myself to be compassionate towards them and help them work on these things. Becoming much more aware of my gut reaction to many students, positive or otherwise, and how I responded differently based on what I was expecting. Okay, so some of that was just kind of, bringing that awareness and kind of the ripple effects of that. I want to, in the few minutes that remain, we're not going to have time to go through the sources, but I want to share a perspective on Moshe and the incident of Moshe hitting the rock and not being able to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's really a very, very troubling section. Pun intended, we're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. Because Moshe Rabbeinu we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not talking about any regular person. So we're kind of trying to find, what did he do that was bad enough in order to warrant the punishment, this massive punishment of not going into Eretz Yisrael, his life's dream, everything he's been working towards. So something big enough to justify that, but at the same time, kind of moderate enough in order to fit with who we know Moshe was. So this is, the Mefarshim really struggle with this. There are many different explanations for how we understand what his sin was, how did it impact things. People talk about speaking to the rock as opposed to hitting the rock. Rashi says it was an issue of Chilul Hashem. Had he spoken to the rock, that would have been Mekadesh Shem Shamayim more. It's a bigger nace as opposed to hitting it. And we have, I'm just jumping around because of our lack of time. Source number 4, the Rambam talks about the anger that was the issue. We're supposed to have this measured, find the golden path, except for certain things where we're supposed to be extreme, and anger is one of the things we run away from. The fact that Moshe got angry, that was the issue. The Sforno talks about different levels of nisim that go on, and Moshe, there's nisim that happen with only Hashem's intervention. There are nisim that happen where we do an action, and that brings about the nace. And Hashem told him to speak to the rock, which is a higher level of nace because there's no action done and the water just starts pouring out. But Moshe and Aaron didn't necessarily think Bnei Israel were on the level to merit that miracle because of their, kind of rebelliousness and their complaining. So in hitting it kind of lowered the level of the nace, and Hashem was upset that Moshe didn't kind of believe in them more and do this nace on a higher level. There are many different interpretations to it. I would like to share Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a perspective that he shared, and he kind of says, I tremble at, sharing a different perspective because there are so many perspectives shared, but it's so hard to wrap our heads around. Like, Moshe got forgiveness for the entire nation for much worse things, and yet, he couldn't get enough forgiveness from Hashem to be able to go. Hashem is very merachim. Moshe knew the tools, he had the tricks. He couldn't get Hashem's forgiveness in order to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's so tragic. His whole life is leading towards this. And what Rabbi Sachs explains is that we have a concept that leaders of each generation are there. Why don't we Yiftach B'dor K'Shmuel B'dor? We don't kind of compare different leaders of different times, because each time has its leader that is well suited for that time. We start off with Moshe and Yoshua, and then we go, we have the whole shalshelet of different leaders at different ages, and we have the Shoftim, and we have monarchy, and then, we have Ezra HaSofer later on, and then later on, we have Zakadim, we have Rishonim, we have Achor, we have different leaders at different, in some generations, they're purely spiritual. In some generations, they have more of a political element to them, or a pragmatic element, communal element to what this administrative element. And in different times, leaders have different qualities that are the perfect match for what that time period needs. And therefore, we don't compare leaders of different times, because that's apples and oranges, and each leader is meant to lead at their individual time. Moshe strikes the rock, which is what he had been told to do close to 40 years earlier, when they had come out and there was no water after Yetziat Mitzrayim, and he was told to hit the rock, and that was what he was supposed to do, and the water came out. And now, 40 years later, he does the same action, and yet he's really reprimanded for it. And what Rabbi Sachs explains is the leader leading a generation of slaves needs something different than the generation of free people. So for a slave, hitting, subservience, that's the language they speak. That's a familiar concept. We kind of demand it and it happens, and we have discipline and it works. Not that was Moshe saying and hitting, but it represented a certain way of communicating that people who had been slaves needed. With free people, you use speech. You explain, you convince, you kind of help them understand it on their own so that they can be motivated to do it. It's a different genre of leadership for a group of people that had never known slavery. And Rabbi Sachs explains that for Moshe, it wasn't a failure, it wasn't a sin, but it reflected a mismatch in leadership now between the leader that they needed to take them out of Mitzrayim and escort them through the desert, and the leader needed to bring them into Eretz Yisrael and establish that society. And Rabbi Sachs says no mortal can be that perfect leader for every situation, for every door, for every time period. And this incident, not that Moshe was punished for it, but it reflected a different style of leadership that this new generation needed something a little bit different to carry on this next stage. And no leader will be able to actually accomplish everything. Moshe's legacy, continues with us. So it's not a shortcoming in him. It's that he's human, and no human can be that perfect match of leader for all generations. The piece that I was very struck by was a little bit later on. If we go to the last source, a little bit later on, when Hashem brings Moshe to look over into Eretz Yisrael, and Moshe's gone through. He's had kind of this time for reflect. Hashem says, "Look over. You're not going to be going in." And Moshe responds. I apologize. Second last source, source number 6. Hashem says to him, "Go up, look at this land. You can look at it, but you're not going to go in. You're going to die." And then Moshe's response, and he attributes it to this whole thing that happened in Mei Meriva. Pasuk Tedvav, source number 6, Pasuk Tedvav, Vayidaber Moshe al Hashem lemor, Yifkor Hashem Elokei Aruchot lekol basar ish al heida. Hashem, please appoint a new leader for these people. And Rashi explains what's Elokei Aruchot. Next source, number 7. Lama ne'amar, amar lefanav, ribono shel olam, galui lefanecha, da'ato shel kol echad ve'echad. ואינן דומים זה לזה. מנה עליהם המנהיג שיהא סובל כל אחד לפי דעתו. Meaning Moshe realizes we need to adjust things based on who's in front of us, whether on a national level, based on the time period, generation, based on the individual level, the individual students here between us. I don't think it's necessarily the pshat in Rashi, but kind of in the context of what Rabbi Sachs explains, that appreciation of that leader being able to know who's in front of them, respect who's in front of them, connect who's in front of them, not because it just happens automatically, quickly, easily. Yes, they're the students who, from the first day, we just connect with, but the responsibility to kind of understand ourselves, do that inner work. Going back to what we said, monitor what are we conveying? Are we assuming negative intent? What are our words suggesting to students? What are we expecting of them? And kind of connecting to their highest potential, to their goodness, relating to them as intrinsically and inherently good, and creating that culture of winners in the classroom. And even when there are bumps, accessing that compassion to be able to really reach them and lift them up to be their best selves, so that we really can create a culture where people feel very valued and partnering with us in rising to their best selves. Thank you, everyone.